SculptureNow is a nonprofit organization for sculpture and education, and we started 24 years ago. I founded it with the help and encouragement of a couple of local artists. And one of them said at some point, why do we keep trying to get into galleries in New York City? Why do we schlep these big heavy sculptures down there? Let's bring New York City people to the Berkshires. The main criteria is really the quality of the sculpture. We don't look at anything else. We don't look at where they come from, their gender, their race, the price of the sculpture. We look at the quality of it, and then we also pay a lot of attention to the safety of having a sculpture in a public place. People walk from the ticket booth, they take their time. It's a beautiful place. They can sit down, they can have a picnic, they can spend as much time as they want by each sculpture. So this is a great site for us.
This is Cecilia, and her name came because when in the late 50s, my baby brothers used to watch a television program called Beanie and Cecil. And Cecil was the seasick sea serpent who lived on land. And so she is named after Cecil, but clearly she's not a guy, so she is Cecilia.
Did that show, what inspired you to do that? Was that
just the name?
Just
Cecil the seasick sea serpent.
Right.
Sat. I have been quilting in metal since about 2010, and I started out making flat quilts, that were wall pieces, but and were based on quilt patterns, but they were all made out of scrap metal, automotive, and tin, and whatever I can find in the junkyards. And then I started going three-dimensional. At one point somebody asked me, well, have you ever thought three-dimensional? And I said no, and of course immediately started. So then I made a big bird, a bittern, that actually sat right here in the middle of these nice plants. And it was basically a triangle, so they still were flat surfaces that were quilted. Then the next year I started rounding them a little bit, and it wasn't last year, it was 2 years before, because we didn't have a show during COVID. Mm-hmm. But then I started making really round things. Then COVID came, mm-hmm. and the show was canceled, but the piece was finished. And I really need to work, and I was alone during COVID, and I really needed something to work on. So I came up with this idea, and my friend Rich Wanser, who is a wonderful, wonderful metal worker, I make a maquette, which is a small model of what I want, and then he builds the frame and out of steel. So he did that at his house, and then I picked it up and took it back to my house, and then I do what I do, which is quilting in metal, and covered it. And it took literally about 2 years to do this one.
Wow. So this is actual fabric over the metal?
It's not fabric.
Oh,
it's all metal.
Oh, all metal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the colors, it's also important to me that the colors be the way I find them. I do not paint or do anything like that. I have to find the colors. So if I'm starting out, this one was going to be obviously a blue, green, silver palette. So I found a whole lot of those colors and then started working. And it's fun because actually some of the things that are in here are unusual. Like I found a green squished mailbox that had a U.S. postal eagle on it. So that's in there, and there's some license plates from Vermont because of course they're green. And there's I found a huge big map of the town of Beckett on a sheet of metal. So there's a lot of Beckett all carved up in there too.
So basically, it's almost like you get an idea, mm-hmm. and then now you got to find it. Mm-hmm. The resources, or sometimes you just find that
sometimes I find things that I just like and I save them for a future thing. But in this case, because the stomach of the creature is all silver, mm-hmm. I had to find specific silver pieces because I didn't want them all to be the same. So there's a lot of undercarriage of cars that apparently have to do with insulation for carburetors and things like that, which I am ignorant of, but I like the shapes and the patterns on them.
Now, some of these things, do you have to purchase?
I don't if I'm at the dumps. I do if I'm at the if I go, say, to an automotive junkyard, then they sell metal by the pound.
Oh, okay.
So I would make a collection of stuff, and then they would figure out how much it weighed and how much, which is, I mean, it's not terribly expensive. I could have a good pile of stuff, and they charge me $6 or $7 for it.
And that takes, now when you say you find the pieces, do you have to?
Each piece is cut by hand, and I make a small pattern to fit it into the pieces that had gone before. Then each piece is cut by hand. Then I line it up with the pieces that are in front of it, because they have to have little holes along the side for me to sew in, because obviously the needle doesn't go through the metal. So I punch the holes with a drill press, and then sew it with wire, and different colors of wire depending on what colors of metal I'm working with. It wasn't so much a question of difficulty, it just was a question, it's vast. And, you know, for me, this is much, much larger than anything I've ever done. And so it was just a question. And it's interesting because at the beginning, like, I did the head first, and there are certain metals on the head that then I ran out of, and I couldn't find them. So I'm constantly replenishing my supply of colors. So that there are things that are on the big hump in the middle was the last thing to be done, and there are things on that aren't on any of the other pieces because, you know, I'd run out of the pieces I found in the early part of it.
Now, does this kind of people you notice gravitating towards it?
I mean, people like them for some reason, which is nice. And I mean, I was not here for this, but I was told that a week or so ago they had a great big bridal party here, and the whole bridal party was cavorting around it and having pictures taken with it. So, you know, it pleases people.
The name of my piece is Bone for Crea Garden. And I named it after that because the forms that the bones create are kind of reminiscent to the Phocrea plant, which is a genus of succulents. And the bases are actually made of hypertufa, which is a common thing used in garden planters. So it all kind of made sense to make a garden out of all these forms. And I've got river rocks underneath it to help it nestle it in the hill over here. This is actually, bone is one of my favorite mediums to work with. And it's inspired by some surgeries that I had about 12 years ago. And I've always been a maker, I'm an artist, and I've always collected bones and shells and treasures like that. And when I started to work on art that was truly for me, I started to cut things apart and put them back together, much like my surgeries had done. So I realized that I was investigating really what had happened to me and thinking about rejuvenation and renewal and rebirth and that kind of thing. And I also started thinking about beauty, like, can discarded things be beautiful? You know, can something that's been repaired be beautiful? And those are themes that I use in all of my work. And yes, bones, that's a big part of the mediums that I use. Not really. I think this is actually one of my biggest pieces, and by adding the cast hypertufa, that was a new medium, a new material to use. And I found that it's a great thing because you can make it into any shape you want. It complements the bones really beautifully from a color standpoint, and it also is strong, so it helps ground the bones, which are quite delicate ultimately.
Now, how do you get to these bones?
Well, a lot of things are given to me by friends, and I have a hunter friend who every fall he hunts for venison for his family. He feeds his family and part of the community. And so a couple years ago, when I started doing this full time, he showed up one day with 2 dressed deer carcasses for me, which I got to tell you was a little daunting, but now every fall we do this, and I've got a system of cleaning them. And the cool thing about that is we both feel very strongly of using all parts of the animal, so nothing goes to waste. So he gets meat for his family, I get materials for art, and then I literally, when I'm boiling all of everything down, I take what's left over and put it out in the woods behind my studio, and the animals eat it. So every bit of the deer is used. It's mixed. Some people are a little frightened, to look at bone, it's that simple. And other people are really intrigued. And I've had several people that I didn't know who identified very much from their surgical experiences too, and connected immediately with other shapes that I use that are more reminiscent to the surgeries that I had. And that's a really beautiful thing, because I think a lot of people have trouble expressing, what they've been through from a physicality standpoint. So for people to connect to that, I think is a really wonderful thing. And it wasn't intentional for me. I was just trying to make something interesting. But if my work can get a little deeper, that's pretty fantastic too. Exactly. A life, a new thing, rebirth, rejuvenation, and it's not, these bones a lot we find on the forest floor, discarded. So it's for me, it's exciting to take that and make it into something now that could be celebrated, really, for what it is, for bone, but also for a beautiful shape or a piece of art. So I love that theme, and I think that kind of rejuvenation is going to be an important theme in my work forever, basically.
Now, do we find your work at different places right now?
Yes.
Where? Tell me, yeah.
I am a guild member at Silver Mine in New Canaan in Connecticut. I'm also a core member of Fountain Street Gallery in Boston. I'm also a member of the Sculptors Guild in New York City. So I'm in Boston, I'm in New York, I'm in Connecticut, all around the area.
Now, does all your art stay inside, or is it some of it?
It's both. Some things I use fabric or silk or delicate things like that obviously are more fit for, inside. But I love the idea of bringing this natural material outside, where basically we found it, So it's something that can be very versatile as a material.
So it's called the 5 elements: water, fire, air, earth, and space. It's the 5 elements in Asian culture, and I think I'm attracted to the natural materials in my work. I carve in wood and stone, and so a lot of times I do many different things, but I've done a series of burning wood. But this piece was different because I usually use tall totems and burn them. And this time I got this inspiration to slice wood into sections, and then I placed them in a circle and put wood around each piece, kindling wood around each piece, and then had a taiko drummer perform and a Japanese electronic musician play some music while the pieces were burned. I've done a lot of the burned pieces, so I can pretty much tell how much wood to put around them.
Now, when the darkness of it's all natural burn?
All natural.
No paint?
No paint. The burning was all just natural wood and kindling and birch bark, and and afterwards, there's nothing added to the piece. I think fire tends itself naturally to some kind of performance, and so I always collaborate with. Sometimes it's just the fire, but I like to collaborate with dancers or musicians, or sometimes Buddhist monks, sometimes Native Americans. Actually, I spend half my time doing kind of abstract contemporary work. Sometimes it's in stone, and sometimes wood, sometimes other elements, but usually those. And then the other half of the time I carve Buddhist sculptures, traditional Buddhist sculptures in wood and stone. I think visually, just the charred wood and the surface, but and the blackness of them. But also, I think people get kind of a message that I'm trying to get across with the pieces too. In my burned pieces, I usually title them Purification. And that's inspired by a Hopi Indian prophecy that we are at a crossroads right now. Either we purify ourselves to live more in harmony with each other and with nature, or we become purified by natural destruction, war, whatever. So that's a continuing theme in my work, and I see that in this piece as well. But this piece, I decided to call it the 5 elements because I'm using 5 burned pieces, and really kind of a simpler message of the elements.
Now, when you join them together, is that any particular thing that you did?
So these they're drilled and pinned to the stone, and then up through each piece with rebar. I'm working on a large stone Buddha for a Peace Pagoda temple out on the west coast. That's right across from a big Trident nuclear submarine base.
So it's a flying mountain is the name of the sculpture.
Why?
So it kind of has that lift-off look, and the idea of the arches, that it's some of the arches that I've done are to give you an idea that a question that you can't answer. So can mountains fly, and sort of that conundrum, and so you can free your mind, and so when you walk through, you'll go through a portal and be transformed and maybe get enlightenment. And this is about 10 years old. It just happens to be a piece that I had that was in stock that would fit this space and stuff. So the new stuff I'm doing is quite a bit bigger and taller and more grand. So yeah.
Really? And what's your inspiration? What do you do? A lot of archways?
So no. I mean, my work is called non-objective work, basically. So it's not meant to be anything. But most of the things that inspire me are sort of science and space and things, sort of the micro world and the macro environment. So those are kind of things that I look towards, like the spirals of galaxies and shells and so forth. So I do a lot of twisting forms and DNA shapes that mimic the natural world.
Now, is it all fairly big, large scale?
Yep. Generally speaking, it starts out at 10, 12 feet and goes up to 30 feet, something like that.
And you mold and...
I design everything in a 3D modeling program. So it's a computer program that allows me to create big forms and then unroll the surfaces and weld them back together again. So I've got a big CNC plasma cutting table in my shop, and a whole bunch of different welders and cranes and forklifts and stuff like that. So that's how I fabricate. But designing in the 3D modeling program, I've been doing it since '96, so a long time, and I just basically think in those commands and in the drawing, basically the different functions that the software has, and so I've learned to create in it. I actually dream in it when I go to bed and I'm thinking about a sculpture. I'm thinking, okay, click that command and do that command, and then the only happy accident happens between enter and compute, basically, and then after that the thing is made, and then I have to make it. So it's not, there's not, some artists start out and they add and change things as they're building the sculpture, and I do all that in my head in the computer screen.
And it rarely changes once you have it.
Once I hit enter, no way, yeah, it's done, because I use all that information and data to get the engineering, which, when you're doing big work like this and it goes in front of buildings and you're working with architects and so forth and public art, it has to go through a process, and so you need engineers, you need art, they have, conservators that go through the piece and make sure that it can not, that it's safe and it won't fall down, and that when people interact with it, it won't be dangerous and so forth. Oh yeah, no, I sell work to corporations and public art throughout the country. Yeah, anywhere from Florida, New York, Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, Kansas City.
And most of your stuff outside?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's all big outdoor work. Yeah.
And if some does rust?
So it's called stainless, not stain-free. So we have a cleaning regimen. It's like every 5 years you got to clean them. It's got an uplifting feel to it and a flavor, and it's Arches kind of draw people in. There's, you can't really go by an arch without going through it, and so you put an arch out in a field, there's going to be a path that's going to go to it, that wasn't there before. So, yeah. I live with a view of the mountains in my window all the time, so we're always looking at the high peaks of mountains, and so sort of an accidental, a happy accident, I would say. In that idea, it wasn't really intentional. New England is the head, is the center for sculpture, and absolutely, New York, New Jersey, International Sculpture Center, all that stuff is here. Storm King, Grounds for Sculpture. This is, there's a lot of serious work done in New England, so it's nice to be here, and there's a lot of good venues to show, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of good customers that will get to rediscover me, because now I'm on the other coast, so it's like I'm.
So what's the hardest thing about doing any of this kind of stuff?
The hardest thing I think is dealing with the different with the danger of the weight of the things, and when you're flipping them around, to work on them, it can be sort of a touch and go situation, right? It can be dangerous, and so that's just sort of the physicality of working on this scale. Right. And as I said, this is kind of on the small side of what I'm doing these days. So they can get away from you pretty quick, but the funnest part is when you put them up and you stand back and you look at them and they're done, and everybody is going, ooh, wow, wow, So that's the payoff.
Right.
There you go.